Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
Hi, I'm Nicky Moran,
And I'm Beverley Glick.
and we are going to be talking about stories for creatives,
Mm-hmm.
how to find stories to sell your creative work.
Yes, we are. And we're going to talk about why storytelling is so important in this context. And we're going to talk about a little bit about mistakes people make when they're trying to communicate about their work.
And most importantly, we're going to be telling you about an online course we're running in a couple of weeks' time, which is all about finding and telling stories around your work. Because what we really want is for more creative people, whether you work in a corporate, you have your own products or services, or you're an entrepreneur, we want more people to get really good at this skill, because it can absolutely help you to sell more of your work, to feel more purposeful, and to increase your profile. So we have a vision.
We do have a vision.
We will tell you in a moment, but I think what we'll do is just tell you our story first of all. Okay, Beth.
So my story is that I started out as a music journalist in the late 70s. And I was tasked as a young reporter to interview new bands. And I did the first major interviews with bands like Spandau Ballet and Duran Duran. And they were really fantastic at telling their own story. And along with Spandau Ballet, I came up with the term the New Romantics. And that kind of launched a movement. But what I found was that so many artists and musicians were just really poor at communicating their story. They felt that their music should speak for itself. So I then became really, really good at teasing stories out that even they couldn't see for themselves. So I ended up creating myths for bands at that time. And fast forward many years, now I specialise in helping people tell stories, not just musicians, but creators of all kinds.
Yeah. So I have a background of being a very multifaceted creative person, as many of my tribe are. I coach creatives now, but I was the kind of creative that could dabble with many things. So I had so many different projects on the go. So at one time I was a dance teacher, I was a singer in a jazz band, I was a radio broadcast journalist, I worked in PR for a music company, I travelled, I was a singing waitress, I taught flirt coaching. I mean, I tried so many different things. And I think I was a very typical creative person in many respects, in that I had a curiosity about me, a passion. I was very ambitious. But what happened was I was going in all sorts of directions and I wasn't making any headway to anywhere in particular. It was all a bit sort of going in many directions, but not one. And it was very frustrating for me, because I felt like, I know I'm bright, I know I'm talented, like, why do I keep changing my career? And I got really frustrated, and all my kind of more mainstream friends were like making loads of money and sort of getting ahead with their careers. And I was sort of chopping and changing and going in all sorts of directions. And then a few years ago, I got into training, which actually made me good money. So that was a really good thing. But that also kind of trapped me, because I ended up sort of following work to pay the bills rather than focus on my heart. So before I'd been focusing on my heart and going in many directions, then I focused on money and got a little bit trapped into that world. And then a few years ago, I worked very much on understanding my vision, my purpose, and really getting clear about what I really needed to do in my life to feel fulfilled. And I realized that I loved coaching people. I loved helping others really express themselves and to find direction. So I set up Coaching Creatives a few years ago, and it has just transformed my life, and I really adore what I do. I love helping creative people really make traction in their careers and find work they love and learn to get the word out about what they do, so they make good money from doing what they love. And I met Bev a few years ago because we both also teach people how to do TED style talks, and I've worked with a lot of creative people to learn how to tell stories through TED style. Do you know what TED is? You might know it's a platform of really inspiring presentations, and it's all about storytelling.
Yes, a lot of it is. It's about just finding the one idea that you want to spread, but it's very much based around sharing personal stories.
Yeah. So when I met Bev, I realised we both had this passion around storytelling, and so we set up working together, and we've been working together ever since. And we set up something called Trailblazing Creatives, and we teach people how to market themselves through telling their story. And it's beautiful work, because what it really does is helps creative people become less bashful and more authentic in talking about their work in a way that connects with others. So
we just want to talk about our vision.
Yeah, we have a vision that has culminated from the work we do. So our vision, wait for it. Where is it? Okay.
Wait for the screen share.
Yeah, this is the screen share moment. So this is our vision. We want to help more creatives reach their full potential, do work they love, and build their profile. And the wider vision for us is to help more people engage with unique creative projects and interesting passion projects as well. Because I know people we work with are also entrepreneurs. I've worked with chefs and coaches and people who do teach yoga. So not just creatives in the sort of artistic sense, people who are passionate. So it's really important for us to help more people engage with really beautiful, passionate
and there are
projects.
So many talented people out there that are just falling by the wayside because there's so much noise out there, and they're super talented, but unless they're telling their story well, we're not really going to be able to engage with them.
Yeah, and it was really frustrating for me seeing so many people with so much talent just getting lost and holding themselves back and not having the confidence to get out there and go for what they really want. So that's our purpose for the work we do. And we've got an online program that we're going to talk about a little bit later, that's starting in a couple of weeks. So if you enjoy tonight and you find this really inspires you, we hope you'll want to enjoy, we hope you will join our online program starting in a couple of weeks, which is a 2-month online course that we've designed for creatives.
And we've got a very special offer just for you.
Just for you. Yes,
later
because
on.
You're here tonight. We will offer that. So let's just ask the people who are here tonight, why do you think storytelling is important for creatives or entrepreneurs? What's your opinion here? Why is it important? We'd love to know from you.
What drew you to this subject? What interested
No
you
idea
about
is
this?
wrong. Yeah, what drew you to this subject, and why do you think storytelling is important? Because we hear a lot about storytelling. Personally, it's how I make sense of the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. It's how we all make sense of the world.
It is actually. It really is. Yeah, it's how our brains work. We're hardwired to make sense of the world through stories.
Yeah.
So that's
Thomas agrees.
Yeah,
we all
Thomas
agree.
agrees.
Good Julia. Yeah. It's how we all make sense of the world. It's how we create meaning.
Yeah.
So allows people to relate and connect.
Very
Love
much
it.
so.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks everyone. So we think there's 3 things that are really important. So let's just look at our thoughts here. So really important here, nobody else has your story. It is your most precious asset.
Yeah, just think about that for a moment. You know, how many billions of people are there on the planet, but nobody has your story? It's the only thing no one else has. You might be in an industry where you're doing something similar to a lot of other people, but nobody does it the way you do it, and nobody else has got your backstory.
Yeah. So we know there's millions of artists and musicians, and everybody is actually unique, but it's only when you know how to articulate your uniqueness can you stand out from the crowd. So when you're able to create a compelling narrative around what you do, it really helps you to stand out from the crowd and have longevity of your career. And so we're going to look at some examples of that in a minute. The next one is, hold on a minute. Something weird has happened.
There you are.
Oh, okay.
There it is. So if you tell a story, people are much more likely to connect with you emotionally and therefore buy your work. And I think the emotional connection is really key here. That's what story does. It's a bridge between people. It's the quickest bridge between one person and another when you tell a story. And it's that emotional connection that is going to help people not only resonate with you and understand more about what you do, but also to trust you.
Yeah, people buy
people,
essentially. So your work might be interesting, but unless people can emotionally engage with it, they're probably not going to remember it or connect afterwards. Okay, so let's look at one more reason. It increases the value and the meaning of what you do. So let's just look at that a minute. How do I come out of this? Sorry, guys. Something weird just happened.
So stop.
Okay, stop. We're going to go. Sorry. Yeah, it increases the meaning and the value. You had a great story around this.
Yeah, I do. I'm really fascinated by this idea of story increasing value. And I came across a project a while ago called the Significant Object Project. And it was actually run by two journalists who wanted to test a theory. So what they did is they bought a number of objects from thrift stores in the States for just, hardly any money at all. And they got some writers to write stories about each of these junky objects. And they put them up for sale on eBay. And I think they spent, probably about $20 on all of these objects. And when they sold them, they sold them for in total about $8,000. So they proved that story literally increases value.
Yeah, because it's the meaning behind it that we emotionally engage with. That's why stories are so powerful. So we're going to look at some other examples now. But if we ask you, people who are here tonight, what artists or entrepreneurs do you know who you think are really good storytellers, who use stories really well to promote their art, their work, or their brand? I'd love to know anybody that stands out for you. And we're going to give you a couple of examples. People remember us by our stories. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Eleanor. Absolutely. Anybody that comes to mind? Artists you love?
Who springs to mind as someone that you relate to because of their story?
Yeah. And you're like,
Brené Brown.
Brené Brown. Absolutely. Yeah, she's such, for those of you who don't know Brené Brown, she is basically an academic, and she brought storytelling to talk about shame and to talk about vulnerability, and they were subjects that nobody talked about before. And because she's such a compelling storyteller, she just talked about her own life stories and her own personal vulnerabilities. She's just become a sensation in the world of personal development. She's just loved by people who are academics and regular lay people who identified with her story as their own. And that's what stories do. We read into the stories because we relate to them on a personal level.
We find ourselves in other people's stories, and that's how
Michael Hyatt tells good stories. Wow, who's Michael Hyatt?
Tell us more about Michael Hyatt and Sean Aco.
And Sean Aco. Any other Alexander? Oh, all these people that we've never heard of. If you can tell us any more about them, that would be really great. So let's look at some of the examples. Some brilliant storytellers who we believe have absolutely mastered it in terms of having longevity. Look at Sean Anker's TED Talk. Okay, we will do, Tom. Absolutely. Yeah, so TED Talks are a great place to raise your profile. Good recommendation there. Okay, so the first person we think is a master storyteller is Tracey Emin.
This lady.
She has basically built her whole career around this story of her unmade bed. I mean, who would ever have thought that would be seen as a groundbreaking piece of art?
Yeah, I mean, it is fascinating, and it's on display in the Turner in Margate, and I went to see it last week. And it's amazing the power it still has after 20 years. It's still controversial. And the whole story of this bed is about how she turned a real moment of despair in her life when she was feeling suicidal into a work of art, which is now considered a masterpiece by many people. And every single part of that unmade bed has got a story behind it. And And when I looked at it, I immediately went back to my 20s when I was having a difficult time. So I was finding myself in her story.
And I think what's interesting for me about this, a lot of people we work with don't know what their story is or how to tell it, because they just think, oh, I've got nothing to say. But for me, this is a really good example of it's like a snapshot in her life. Yeah. It's like a moment of despair. And that's kind of very interesting for people to connect with. And for me, she's a very uncompromising artist.
Utterly, yeah, completely uncompromising and willing to just expose every part of her life and psyche. Not everyone is going to be prepared to do that.
Yeah, so sometimes exposing something about your life or sharing something very vulnerable is a very powerful story to tell. I mean, that's why, you know, in social media, you know, when people talk about difficulties, people relate, because it's like we so want to connect in that meaningful way. So I think she's a real pioneer in exposing, you know, something very raw and real, something like an ordinary moment. It's almost like she was disgusted with herself. And for me, that piece of art, you know,
she transformed it into something transcendent.
Yeah. So let's look at somebody else.
Yeah.
We think this fella, Ed Sheeran, is a great storyteller. He's a talented everyman in terms of our archetypes, because he's an ordinary guy. He's nobody special. He doesn't have a particularly strong image, but he's a real ordinary Joe who tells a good story.
Well, and we found this article on the Telegraph, actually, which was about how many of his songs have real life experiences behind them. And when he was 18, his very first record was about a homeless woman that he met, and that's his first single was that story. And so he's always used these really strong stories behind all of his songs, and of course that becomes a talking point.
Yeah, and I think, you know, so many great songs or great songs come out of, you know, difficult times that we go through in life. And, you know, and it's about being willing to talk about the difficulties as well as the celebrations that can really connect people. So let's look at somebody else now. We looked at a musician, we've looked at a singer. Let's look at an entrepreneur now, a really famous one. We thought Richard Branson was a good example of a great storyteller. Yeah. He's got a fantastic origin story where he tells this whole story about how he first set up an airline, and basically it was because he tell us the story.
He was in Puerto Rico trying to get to the British Virgin Islands, and the airline didn't have enough passengers to warrant a flight, so they cancelled it. And he had a beautiful lady waiting for him there. So he hired a plane and borrowed a blackboard, and as a joke wrote Virgin Airlines at the top. $39 one way to the British Virgin Islands. And then he went around all the passengers who'd been bumped and filled up his first plane.
Amazing. So he's like obviously very entertaining, and he's really willing to tell those stories. He's got, you know, I've got his autobiography and it's captivating. And the thing is, you know, him telling those stories makes us feel inspired by him, and then we want to buy his products because we identify with him as somebody who we want to be more like. And I think that's what stories also do. They tell you the values of the personality, and, you know, they inspire us to want to go beyond ourselves.
This is actually a quote from him. He says, "The ability to tell a story will help build trust. Always tell the truth, always be transparent." So there's no point making it up. This is about being really honest and truthful.
So we've talked about some kind of famous people who have longevity. We want to look at like what gets in the way though of people telling their stories. Some of the mistakes we see creatives make, and we identified there were 3 common themes here, and you might identify with these themes for yourself, and I'm definitely under the banner of one of them. So let's look at the first one. We'd love to know, people who are live, give us your thoughts on these things and what you think. So the first idea that stops people is that many artists think my art should speak for itself. Or in other words, I don't really know what to say.
I've got no idea what to say about this.
I have no idea what to say. So my art should speak for itself is a really common one. Does anybody finding it difficult. They don't really know how to tell stories, or they think, oh, you know, I don't really have much to say.
Yeah, I mean, this was a classic one that I came across all the time when I was a music journalist. You know, bands who would say, you know, I'm not going to interpret my lyrics for anybody. I think my music should speak for itself, and the listener should make up their own mind.
Yeah,
I get that to a certain extent.
Well,
but
people should just see it's brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, this is my work. You know, but the problem is for a lot of people. You know, when I go to an art gallery, I cannot connect with the art until I know something around the piece, or some music. Some music just, you know, moves me. I get it straight away. But sometimes, you know, you kind of need to know the background for you to feel more, you know, more of a connection to the artist.
I've got a friend who does marketing PR for a gallery in London. And she was telling me recently that she was trying to put together the publicity for an exhibition that was coming up. And she was speaking to the artist, and he just wasn't giving her anything.
Yeah.
You know, he wasn't giving her any story.
So the problem is, if you don't know how to tell people stories, you can't really get press easily, because journalists are going to find it really difficult to write something about you. You're going to find it really hard to make something sticky or get your work out there, because people can't relate to it. So yeah, you had a good example of kind of people who weren't very good at storytelling.
Yes.
Tell us about that one.
Well, I used to work for a pop magazine in the 80s, and there was a guy that was like the black music correspondent, and he used to have to go out and interview all of these soul artists in the 80s, and there were a lot of amazing soul records in the 80s. But every time he went out to interview them, he said, oh God, they just used to tell the same story. Yes, well, I started singing in church when I was in the gospel choir, and it kind of became a bit of a standing joke. And because they weren't able to kind of differentiate themselves in any way, it often meant that even though these people were incredibly talented, people didn't follow them as much as other artists because there was no story.
Yeah, so you have to find, like, what's your angle? What's the story that makes you different to everybody else? And somebody like Grandmaster Flash, who was a similar era, was, you know, masterful at this. You know, songs like White Lines in the 80s was all about, you know, avoiding taking cocaine.
Well, the rappers kind of came along in the late 80s and kind of swept away a lot of these soul artists that didn't really have a story, because obviously rap was all about telling stories about what was happening on the streets.
Yeah.
So that's why it broke through in such a huge way, because it was so different and because it was a really raw story.
Yeah, and I think our purpose for doing this work is I think many people don't know how to tell their story, or they feel shy of their story, or they're worried about sharing it because they think they'll be judged. And I think it can be really powerful when you get some feedback. We did a training recently, and, you know, the feedback from everyone was like learning, oh my God, that's what makes a good story. So I think that the work we do is really helping artists, giving them feedback to say, that's a fantastic story. Yeah. You should share that one, and giving them the confidence that...
So what often happens is that we are just blind to our own story. We don't know what's interesting about us. And that's what the power of actually working in a group, to actually, so that someone can say to you, oh, that's what you just said, that's really interesting, because often we don't know.
Yeah. Well, we'll give you some questions in a bit for you to think about, maybe stories of where you could start. Let's look at some other issues. Okay, so the second issue we see is too many ideas, no clear narrative. I'm going to come back to the group now. Does anybody have many different projects on the go? So this was me. This is my story. You know, I was doing dance and photography and journalism, and I know so many creatives who have many, many disparate projects on the go because they're curious people, and that is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And the problem with that is, if you've got too many directions or too many narratives, guess what? People can't connect with you because it's confusing. So I interviewed the executive producer of MTV, who's a friend of mine, and she was saying if they ever think about interviewing an artist or somebody that's contacted them, they always go on the website, and if there's too many different ideas on the website, or they're confused, no,
They won't be interested.
It's a no. So what you've really got to think about is, even if you've got several different projects, you've got to learn about what is the overall narrative, what's the theme that brings all of your work together.
And actually, most of the time, that is you.
Yeah.
You are the person you are the common theme.
Yeah, so you need to kind of find out, underneath everything you do, what's the underlying philosophy? Because what you probably find is, even if you do a bit of this and a bit of that, there's always like something that fires you up. There's always something that it comes back to. And that's what we do. We help people understand what's the overall narrative. And somebody who's a really good example of this is Grayson Perry. Let's have a look at him a minute. He's really amazing. So, you know, Grayson Perry is many different things. He's got his pot exhibitions. He's a documentary maker. He's also a teacher. He's a philosopher, I would say. But he's really established an incredible narrative for himself. So, you know, we looked at his website, and it's basically Perry works with traditional media such as ceramics, cast iron, bronze, printmaking, and tapestry. He uses their seductive qualities to make stealthy comments about society, including its pleasure, injustices, and flaws, and to explore a variety of historical and contemporary themes. So that's a really strong narrative. So he can kind of do anything, and it always comes back to this: I'm making comments about society. And, you know, he's just a sensation because he's fascinated and he's fascinating. And I don't think I would like his pots if it wasn't for the narrative around them and the comments he makes about life. Tim's saying, I've been stuck in this space for a few months, whether to bring my online stuff together in one place, but worried about whether it'll put people off. And I think it's really about learning, how can I be coherent? Because we all hear about, you have to have a niche, you know, and I think that can really hinder us as creatives, because many of us have many different things that we want to do. And I think it is possible to do many different things. But I think if you're going to do that, you really have to get very, very good at making it coherent.
Well, you know what we always say to the speakers that we train for TED events is that it's fine to have lots of aspects of your talk, but it's all got to come back to the one central message. And this is relevant to creatives as well. It's like, we're not saying don't do lots of projects, but find the thread that links them all together.
Tim's asking if it ties in with the Enigma profile. Not especially, Tim. I think this is a problem for creatives generally, because we're so multifaceted, we're so curious about life, and that can be sometimes to our detriment when we're trying to communicate ourselves in a consistent way. So I think all the profiles struggle from this. Not just Enigmas. Should we look at the next one? So another mistake we see happen a lot.
Oh yes, this is a good one.
This is the third one, and I think this is an interesting one. It's about being too conceptual or abstract. So I've put an example here of contemporary dance.
You're an expert at that.
Well, I studied contemporary dance when I was a youngster. I loved it. I am a dancer. I love contemporary dance. I'm passionate about it, and I'm really interested in the body and the form. And so for me, going to see contemporary dance, I get richness from it because I understand it. But I remember when I was 18, I took a boyfriend of mine at the time who was a very artistic guy. He was a photographer. I'm not talking about someone very straight-laced. I took him to see the Rambo Dance Company, and we argued all the way back from Manchester because he said that was the biggest load of He hated it, and I think he was very affronted by it because he couldn't understand it. And I was like, but it's brilliant, it's beautiful. And I was like trying to justify why this piece was so good, but he couldn't relate to it. And I think that audiences can feel very thrown or frustrated. I think conceptual art can make audiences feel stupid. And that can make people feel angry.
Can't relate to it.
So we're not saying, hey, don't be conceptual, be really, really, obvious. We're not saying that. Make conceptual art. It's beautiful. We love it.
But just understand how to tell the story about behind the concept.
You need to find ways to make it meaningful. Because if people understand the story behind it, and if you can talk about that in the media, then suddenly your audience will go, that's fascinating. It's like when you view something and you see it from a different perspective.
Because you can go and see, because you were saying the other day about how you've been to art exhibitions and you've just come away feeling cold.
Yeah.
Because you just haven't got a sense of what the story is at all.
Yeah. So it's been interesting. Like, oh, that's interesting. I'll never buy it and I'll never go back there because it's not emotionally connected. So we were talking before about stories make things meaningful and they connect with us emotionally, and then that makes us want to know more or connect more with the artist because we feel something towards them.
Should we talk about Matthew Bourne?
Yeah, so I think somebody for me who I think's done this very well is Matthew Bourne. I think he's very commercial, but he's also retained the beauty of the art form. I think he does it beautifully. So he's famous for taking Swan Lake, and he uses traditional narratives with a twist. So he had all of these swans as very, very attractive men.
I found a fantastic quote that really summed it up, actually, the way that he works. It says, classical choreographers could learn a great deal from Bourne's attention to narrative. Programs for his productions as often as not have no synopsis. The story is told sentence by sentence by the dancers on the stage. The difference this makes to the audience experience cannot be exaggerated. Choreography and dance, no matter how ingeniously beautiful, cannot be enjoyed if you're trying to work out what the hell's going on. So again, this just emphasizes again the power of narrative to captivate an audience and to connect with an audience.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, just checking in with what anybody's saying. Okay, so let's look now at, so how do you find stories? That's what the topic was about today. How do you find stories and where do you find them? So basically, stories are everywhere. You know, probably you had something that happened today that you could tell a story about, but our stories are often hidden to us. But here are some ideas of the types of stories you might think about around your art that can make it interesting. So origin story, how you and your project got started. So that Richard Branson idea was a great origin story because it was just so original and captivating.
And I've got another example too, which is from a product range this time. This is Innocent Smoothies. And they do an absolutely brilliant job of telling their story on their website. And it's really, really short. I could read it out in a couple of minutes. So it says, we started Innocent in 1999 after selling our smoothies at a music festival. We put up a big sign asking people if they thought we should give up our jobs to make smoothies, and put a bin saying yes and a bin saying no in front of the stall. Then we got people to vote with their empties. At the end of the weekend, the yes bin was full. So we resigned from our jobs the next day and got cracking.
Great story.
It's really simple and it's just a paragraph.
Yeah, exactly.
But it tells you an awful lot about their ethos.
Yeah, it tells you about their values, why they do what they do. So there's a lot of meaning in why you started a project. Often we start projects because we're passionate about something or something drove us to want to start it. You know, for me, setting up coaching for creatives was because I couldn't stand meeting all these creative people that were so talented and yet broke or stuck doing jobs they hated. So that I really cared about that. So we're going to test you in a minute and ask you some of these stories, but let's look at some other ones. Your passions and influences. So I worked with a guy who had like passions for, he was a photographer and his passions were like old 50s films that he was brought up with. So he went from really hating going and talking in networking situations. He was trying to get an agent for his photography. And then when he talked about the background of his photographs, he was like, you know, he talked about the process and how he'd been influenced by all these films in the 1950s. He lit up and suddenly he was going to agents and they were all captivated and he got like the pick of many, many agents. So thinking about your influences and your passions can be a really great tool for, you know, coming up with stories. Let's look at another one. Oh, sorry. Yeah, your philosophy.
Your philosophy or your purpose. So this is your big why. It's what I call the big why. It's like, why do you do what you do? What's the deeper purpose behind your work? What do you believe about what you do? So those are always really, really powerful. And we're going back to Innocent Smoothies. They just sum it up in one sentence. Our quest is to make natural, delicious, healthy drinks that help people live well and die old. That's it.
Yeah, or issues you care about. I mean, that's Grayson Perry. That's what he's doing all the time. He's looking at life. He did a whole documentary on Brexit. So if you care about something, that's a great place to find some stories. History.
Yeah, your life story or your career story. I don't know how many of you in the UK saw the George Michael film the other day. That was just so moving, and he just beautifully articulated his whole journey through his career. So there's that as well, and you don't have to be famous to do that.
No, exactly. Overcoming a challenge. Yeah. So I worked with somebody who had a great one. He did a whole album after he basically got very, very sick and couldn't move. He was a very successful musician for the TV industry, and then he basically got sick for a while, and so he created a whole album to try and make himself happy. And that was a fascinating story behind rather an abstract jazz album. It was very beautiful music, but it didn't have any kind of lyrics with it or singing in it. So that story sort of made it very meaningful, and he was able to sort of talk about each of the songs and you know what was going on for him, what was his intention. So it was a great story.
Yeah.
Okay, what else? Your process.
Yeah. How do you do your art? I found a great story a while ago in The Guardian about this young female artist who basically does her art with the ashes of her grandparents.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's really quite macabre in a way, but also quite beautiful. So she talks about her process of using the ashes and transforming them from something kind of dead into something really vibrant and beautiful.
Yeah, so it might be just thinking about, are you doing something really unusual with your process that could be an interesting story? And finally, what you learned and what you want to teach.
Yeah.
So it might be something that you've been through and you want to share that with others. That could be a really interesting story. So we are going to get you to write some stories now. So we've been talking about different types of stories. And so for those of you who are here live, are you ready to come up with a story? Because we thought it would be really fun just to end with people possibly sharing little stories with us. Hopefully you're up for this. So we're going to put up like 4 questions for you. And what we'd like is for you to share, just have a think about a possible story. It doesn't have to be anything amazing. So here's 4 possible questions.
And you don't have to answer them all.
No, pick one.
Just pick one.
Who has influenced you in your work? Or why did you start this project or another project? What's the story behind it? Or what do you stand for? What do you stand for? So there's 4 questions for you, and we'd love you to just have a reflect on that. And we'll play some music while we give you some
have an intermission.
Time. Okay, so it can be early influences.
It could be your very first influences. Yeah. Or it could be recent influences.
And starting your project, perhaps it was an aha moment one day, or you had a conversation with somebody and it got you thinking about something new. What do you stand for?
Yeah, what are your values, or what are your beliefs?
Something that you're raging against. It could be something that really drives you mad.
What's important to you?
So just have a think about those questions, and let's just see if anybody's got something. We don't need a fully formed story. We just want a taster of what it triggers in you. So please feel free, like 1 or 2 of you, to just share something. Sarah Dixon says, I wanted to write things on social media that weren't appropriate to share. Okay. And what were they, Sarah? You can share it with us now. So I started making them into
wonderful.
Nice. Okay.
Oh, that's a great story.
That's
Sarah.
A really interesting story. And that's quite provocative.
Yeah. started making them into artwork.
Because what that does, it makes me intrigued. It like creates my intrigue.
Yeah.
Like, oh, tell me more.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by that. Yeah.
It started with a rant. I love that. For me, it started with a rant.
That's the beginning of the story.
That's the beginning of the story. With a rant. Yeah. Because we want to know, what is that rant? Tell us more.
Story really creates curiosity in that way.
It really does.
Oh, we got a big one here.
Pauline Essen started a peace group 18 months ago after finding my shampoo bottle said it wanted fight signs.
Oh my God, that's a brilliant.
Signs of damage.
I love it, Pauline.
Awesome.
That's a great story.
Lovely. That's really intriguing. And I love that kind of, that little detail there. The shampoo bottle is sort of what makes it intriguing, because it's so sort of everyday. That you can see that shampoo bottle and it kind of takes you there.
It's like everyday connection. We're all like, oh, we've all seen those shampoo bottles, so yeah, we can immediately find ourselves in that story.
Yeah, exactly. Lovely. So it creates immediately a little picture in our heads and it takes us somewhere. Fight signs of damage.
Elena,
I have a story about an answer I wanted to give to a job interview. Here it is. When I started school in Romania, we used to study calligraphy and I loved it. I loved to write and paint, but this was most difficult because back in those days,
Ceausescu was in power. Yeah.
And so, and it was very difficult to find pens and pencils and brushes to paint. Wow. Intriguing. Over the years, I became in love with pens, and at some point I had an extensive collection. Your store was one of the shops I would go and lose myself in.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That is amazing.
That's a wonderful story.
Oh, that's just like, that's really tender and like full of history and meaning, and it says so much about like your passions, your values, and it's also intriguing. It says something about where you've come from.
Yeah,
as an artist. Lovely. That is lovely. Tim's saying it's really lovely. Yeah, so you can see, you've really had an impact from us, and we're all sort of really intrigued. And what stories do like kind of impact in different ways? So we have archetypes, don't we? So it might be a story that provokes. I think Sarah's
is a provocative
story that creates a bit of ooh. And then there's a sort of that charming story that tells you something about my essence, or a talented everyman.
We've never met you, Eleanor, but I already feel connected to you somehow because you've told me a little bit about your life and where you're from. I think in a really beautiful way. Yeah, so it builds trust, it builds meaning, and we're building a relationship through your story, and that makes me want to know more about your art and more about you. So that's beautiful. Thanks everyone who shared. That's fantastic. So let's just move on now just to talk about, so that's basically a starting point. Learning to tell stories is about finding these themes in your life, finding what's behind your work, and all those areas we looked at are great places to find stories. And where you can use stories, just in so many places, you can use them in pictures. Yeah.
Pictures that are just all about the metrics are so boring. Stories make people inspired, and people are more likely want to fund projects if they feel connected to you. Great for blogs, really good in interviews. I've helped so many people get great jobs.
Don't forget that. They're really good in interviews.
Tell a great story and you will, you're so much more likely to get the job.
That moment when they say, tell us a bit about yourself. That's when you need the stories.
Yeah. Stories are great for press and PR, much more likely to grab a journalist's attention if you know how to tell them a good story and make it hooky.
Absolutely.
Great
I can
for
guarantee that.
Making exhibitions more meaningful. Yeah. People are more likely to tell other people if they understand your work and connect with it in an emotional way. Networking.
Yeah.
Presentations, exhibitions, videos, so
many different ways,
so many different places that you can use them. And so if you are inspired by this idea, we would love to invite you to our online program, which we're launching in a couple of weeks' time. We're running it, and it's called Storytelling for Self-Promotion. It's a 2-month online program. We're starting it in 2 weeks' time. We will put the link in the chat box where you can buy it. So it's basically, we're launching in 2 weeks. There's going to be 5 different sessions. There'll be 90 minutes, and there'll also be sessions in between. We'll have a Facebook group where people can share their stories. We'll comment on people's stories, give people feedback, so that you feel like you're getting some coaching from us, because we will be helping you shape your stories, and we'll help you define different types of stories. So here's some of the so you can listen to them live or listen afterwards, because they'll all be recorded. You'll be part of a community. You'll get feedback from us. It'll help you raise your profile and your game. We're going to look at what makes a good story, how to raise your profile through it, how to develop stories around your purpose.
That's a biggie.
Yeah, that's a real biggie, like creating a narrative around what you do. We're going to look at using the archetypes to generate stories. So that might be, are you a provocateur type storyteller? 3 types of stories you can rely on in interviews. And finally, how to make stories hooky and how to pitch to the press.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to cover. And it's going to be, here's the special offer. The launch price is $175, but the price is going to go up on the 1st. But if you book by midnight tonight, we're going to give you a bonus. So we're going to have a private webinar where you can practice telling your stories with us. So it'll be a live webinar, and we're going to sort of like engage with a small group who are kind of going to take us up on this offer. The price is going to go up to $197 on November the 1st, and future prices, this is the first time we're going to run it, but the future price is going to be nearly £300, so grab it now while it's sort of reasonably good value. And basically, if you want to book onto it, you can either go onto my website, or I'm going to share the link in the chat box just now. Can I do that? Yeah, I'm going to put the link in there, but it's going to be really, really groundbreaking. If you are a creative, if you want to be better at presenting yourself, if you're ambitious and want to get a promotion in the corporate ladder, or if you are an entrepreneur or an artist who just hides, who doesn't know how to express themselves, this course will fundamentally change that. And the idea is that we're going to give you lots of challenges. So you'll
have challenges. Forgot to mention that.
Yes. Yeah, because a lot of the material we taught on a 1-day course, and the reason we're taking it online is because we want to go through it over a period of time, and people can share their stories, and we're going to challenge you to also put your stories out there,
start sharing it
in the world. So it's not just going to stay in the training room.
So and it gives you some accountability as well. Yeah.
So somebody's asking for the dates again. The 1-day course was fab, by the way, really moving, as well as learning. Oh, good. I'm so glad. Yes, we will put the dates up again for you. The dates are, but you can come live, or we will send out the recordings afterwards. Yeah. So they're all Mondays. Monday the 6th, which is in a couple of weeks, the 20th, 27th, the 4th, and the 11th. And there'll be about 90 minutes, I think, each of the webinars. Like, obviously, we've not done it again, but I think we are the type to overshare. we kind of want to give loads and loads of value. So if you're the first cohort, you're probably going to get
loads. Yes.
Yeah, we're probably going to sort of go over the top with the amount we'll share with you, because we really want this to be.
Well, we really care about creative people, and we understand the challenges that they face. And so we want to be able to support you as much as we possibly can, sharing our expertise to help you get your stories out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and have a small baby. Yeah, okay, absolutely. That's totally cool, Anna. I mean, we have a really lovely Facebook community called Trailblazer Tribe, which we all already sort of share lots of stuff in there. So this will be more prolific than that. So you'll be able to share your story. You'll be able to get feedback from people, and we will kind of tweak and give you feedback on what's not working about the story, how you might want to tweak the story, because we're really committed to people actually using this work and raising their profile.
We want you to make it really practical and useful,
which is why we're going online and doing it over a period of time rather than just doing it in one day, because our commitment is to making a big change to creatives' lives. So it's really important for us. So that's what we got for you. We've put the link in there, and we will send the link out to our list. if people want to listen and then buy tickets for tonight. So that's by midnight. It goes up to 197 on the 1st of November, and it starts on the 6th of November. It's going to be amazing. I'm really excited about it.
No,
I really can't wait.
It'll be great fun, and you know, we'll be able to work with you and dig into your stories a bit more, and really help you tease out what's interesting about you.
Yeah, Julia's saying looking forward to it. So we, Julia, we're so excited about doing this.
We are.
So if you're watching this afterwards, we hope you can make the programme. It's going to be a lot of fun. It starts on the 6th of November. And if you've got any questions at all, send me an email directly to nikki@nickymoran.co.uk. Any questions at all, really happy to help. And we also have a tribe called Trailblazer Tribe, which is on Facebook, which is a growing, beautiful community of ambitious creatives and entrepreneurs. It's not just creative people. As I say, we also work with yoga teachers, chefs. Yeah. You know, our tribe is for people who are really passionate about their work.
But whatever it is they do, it's doing work that they love.
Exactly. So thank you so much for everybody, and
thanks
thank you for sharing your stories with us.
That was lovely, the stories that you shared. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So, Julia's asking, will this program be in a different Facebook group?
Yes, it will.
We're going to have a small group,
just a small group
for this. Yeah. So it'll be private, where you can share your stories and get feedback.
And just to add it, just to say to everybody who's watching this afterwards, obviously you won't be able to get the bonus, but the program will still be at £175 until November the 1st.
Yes. Eleanor's saying, thank you so much for this webinar. It was lovely to meet you. You too. Really good to meet you. You're welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming live. And anybody who's watching it afterwards, great to meet you. And we hope to see you on our program starting 6th November. Bye for now.
Guys.
Take care.
Now.
Bye.